Hi, Julia. I wanted to introduce Julia Storm. She's an LA-based digital wellness specialist, educator, writer, and advocate. And she's also a frequent speaker and teacher at both public and private schools and a consultant on digital wellness and media literacy curriculum. So, hi, Julia.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for your time. So, I wanted to start with as a digital wellness expert, I wanted to hear from you how you would define a healthy relationship with technology.
I think a healthy relationship with technology is one where you are in control and where you feel a sense of agency in your relationship to your technology. So I think as soon as we feel like we are at the beck and call of our technology and it's calling the shots, we've treaded into an imbalance and unhealthy relationship with it. But if you have a mindful and conscious relationship to it where you can, for example, be picky about the media that you allow in and filter out the sort of more toxic stuff that's on there, and also be conscious of when you use it, how long you use it for, not by implementing, necessarily. For some people, they do need to implement some hacks or, put in some stops for themselves. But sometimes all it takes is just being conscious. So I think a healthy relationship to technology is a conscious one where you are the one calling the shots, not the tech.
Yeah, that's a really great way to frame it. I think a lot of the more recent, studies and data that's coming out is kind of showing the opposite, right? Where technology takes control, that's where the issues come in. So that makes a lot of sense to put it very simply. Okay, and what do you think the signs are of an unhealthy tech relationship? And I think we can say at home, right? Probably at school, it's a little bit more controlled and contained.
Yeah, I think an unhealthy tech relationship, let's say in children, um, looks like an inability to really go for stretches without tech. It looks like, a discomfort when tech isn't an option. I think it looks like just screen time basically taking the place of in-person relationships or time spent, maybe doing other things in real life, in the real world. And then of course, in extreme cases, it can look like addiction. It can look like intense craving and withdrawal when you don't have it. And that's obviously more extreme, but it's a spectrum of, how healthy or unhealthy our relationships are. And I think, to be honest, like most children have an imbalanced relationship to technology, because it just has such a powerful hold over their still developing brains. And so it's very, very hard for them to find and like initiate that balance, which is why we're stuck doing so much of that work for them.
Yeah. And do you think because it's so widespread, like you mentioned, most kids do have an imbalance, which, I've seen as well, firsthand, but also you can see it in the data as well from studies and things like that. Do you think that kind of amplifies it in that, parents think, well, this is just the way it is. Everybody's going to have a meltdown when the iPad gets put away. And then kids see other kids, engaging in unhealthy behavior and they think this is the way it is. Do you think that is a factor in this as well?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I see different behaviors in different communities. And, that just leads me to believe that there is a sort of group think also around it. So there's obviously the addictive parts of the technology itself and the algorithms and all of that. But then there is the culture around it. And, for kids who go to a school where every single child has a phone, for example, or every single child is allowed to be on their devices late into the night, that becomes the culture and the norm. And then, I'll go into another community where the same age kids, none of them have phones yet, and they're not on their devices late at night. And so the culture feels really different, and the kid feels really different in relation to the technology.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And one of the things that I talk about a lot too is there's almost an inequity, right? If you have the means within your family to have, two parents or caregivers or support, it's a lot easier to have a healthier relationship with technology, right? Because, you can limit it, you can be more involved as a parent, where when you compare it to maybe a single parent household, or places where maybe there's more socioeconomic challenges, right? There's a disparity there as well.
Yeah,
um
100%. I mean, it's
yeah,
interesting that it's become kind of uh, like luxurious to be able to unplug, you
yeah,
know?
yeah.
So yeah, I think you're right. There's
I,
definitely a divide.
yeah, I don't know if this has been coined yet, but I've been thinking a lot of the term digital privilege. I think
Yeah.
there's something there. Yeah. Okay, so what are the top three kind of quick tips that any family can use to teach their kids to have that healthier relationship? If you had to name three, what do you think would be the
Yeah.
best ones?
Well, I mean, one sort of overarching thing is don't wait, start the habits young, even like at the very beginning before your kids are really engaged in the world of technology. Just for even what you're modeling, just start your children with good habits in your house young, because it's a lot harder to roll them back later on than to just have it be the norm in your house. But I think that, probably my top tips would be keep devices out of bedrooms until your kids are maybe teenagers. And for all kids, all the way through teens, keep them out of the bedroom overnight. There's just so much research indicating that having a device in the bedroom will lead to problematic, sleep deprivation. Kids stay up later, they wake up earlier, they're interrupted throughout the night because of the phone. And even having the phone in there when it's turned off appears to affect the quality of sleep. So, buy your kid an alarm clock and get the devices out of the bedroom. I also think it's really important to carve out some like family time, and a good time to do that is, at the dinner table if possible. Not all families can do family dinner, but even if you can do it a couple of times a week, or family breakfast, or some kind of space where you come together and just nobody gets to be on their devices. Mom and dad don't get to be on their devices. I think that's really important, going out when you go out to a meal at a restaurant, to just like not pull out the devices, just focus on connection and enjoying the food. Kids have less and less opportunity to practice socializing and social connection, and meals are a really, really good space to do that. So I feel like those are, two places that I would say, without fail, should be kept screen free.
Yeah, and you've mentioned modeling a couple times. It's so important with anything having to do with you know, childhood development, right? I mean, kids are going to copy their parents. So you can't ask a kid to be off their phone on dinner and then you're on your phone checking your work email or whatever it is. It's important that the whole family gets on board, is kind of what I'm hearing from you as well.
Yes, I mean, I think that the parents are like first line of defense. So
Yeah.
you have to walk the walk. I mean, you can't be telling your kids not to behave a certain way and then you're behaving that way. It might fly for a little while when they're young, but eventually they're going to see that you're being hypocritical, and your words are not going to hold nearly as much weight as your actions. So I
Yeah.
think it's really important as an adult to check our own use and see where we can maybe make some changes to also benefit ourselves and be better role models.
Yeah. And, in my personal experience, a lot of times parents are working, right? Sending texts or emails, but, even modeling a work life balance, I mean, this goes beyond tech, is a good thing for kids as well. So, just kind of consciously trying um, to do that at a specific time, hopefully when your kids aren't around or at least not at dinner, is modeling not just good tech behavior, but good work life balance behavior as well. So I think there's benefits to that in a couple different ways.
Yeah,
So
I agree. Totally.
okay. And then my next question has to do with schools. So, what challenges do you see in schools? I know you spend a lot of time going to schools and talking to the parents, talking to the kids, talking to the administrators. So, what challenges do you see as it relates to kids and their uses of device or other tech? And I think this question is specifically inside of schools.
I mean, where do I even begin? I think truly like the issue of technology in schools is huge and difficult and really stressful for school administrators and teachers. I think that, the rollout of tech has been sort of swift in the past 10 years without much of a plan or forethought. And you start integrating technology into your school without really thinking it through, and then you're just kind of stuck. And I think what I see a lot of is just major distraction throughout the school day. And we can get to the phones, but even just on the computers, it's really, really hard. I mean, many schools are doing their best to try to lock things down so that, kids can't access stuff on their computers, but kids are, tech savvy and they find ways. And I think that it's a really, really big ask to put a device in front of a child and then ask them not to be distracted and not to use it in certain ways. That's a really big ask of a child without a fully developed prefrontal cortex. So, in a way, I think it's unfair, to put the onus on kids of like, you need to focus, and then they have the most distracting thing possible right in front of them.
Mhm.
So I think that's one issue. And then the other issue, of course, is phones in schools. And some schools have, gotten on board with locking it down, at least for elementary and middle school. Some schools don't lock it down, and that leads to a lot of problems in the school with distraction, with inappropriate behavior. Um, the schools that are locking it down, you know, even most of them are unwilling to lock down completely when it comes to phones. And interestingly, I think much of that is because of parent pushback. I think a lot of schools would be very happy to say, phone's gone for the entire day, pick it up at the end of the day. But parents are so frightened of not being able to communicate with their children because of school shootings or because of, other emergencies that might come up, even though actually any expert in emergency management will tell you that having all those phones is actually far more dangerous in an emergency situation because again, you can't focus, they make noise, like all of these things. So um, but, there's a ton of pushback from parents. The schools that have implemented successfully phone bans, there's pushback from the kids initially, and then they really come to appreciate it. They're much
Yeah.
focused in class, they are connected to their peers. So I think schools are just really starting to get on board. And then the last piece I'll just say is, you know, I, I don't know the numbers, but I think probably most schools in this country do not have a digital citizenship curriculum.
Yeah.
Um, and some of them do, the more thoughtful ones, the more progressive ones are starting to integrate digital citizenship in middle school and high school. But in my opinion, I think this is a skill that needs to be integrated into curriculum, and that should be started in elementary school. And I think we'll see that change. It's becoming more and more obvious that that's a literacy skill that kids need from a very early age.
Yeah, there definitely seems to be a tipping point just in terms of the studies that are coming out, the Surgeon General's advisory. There's just so much more awareness of this. And, I've said this before, but kids are so much smarter than we give them credit for. If you arm them with the information, they will make good choices, like regardless of what their parents are doing. So,
Yeah.
whether that's in the home or even at school. So, definitely very, very important. And, just also just one quick point, because you mentioned banning phones in schools. This, I know you know this, but has been done in places like Great Britain. And most of their schools do not, or they have phone bans in place. And there's studies that show that there, in addition to the benefits that you've already talked about, it also increases academic performance. So it's sort of a no brainer for the schools. And I hear you on the parents being uncomfortable. There is definitely something in our society where there's a fear of not being connected to our kids. So yeah, I mean, I understand both sides for sure. Um, okay, and then I think the last question would be, I know you work with a lot of families as well. So what are the most common issues you see? Um, and how do you help families resolve these issues?
I think the most common issue that families come to me for is probably just kind of having lost control of device use in the household, and just feeling like it's chaotic and what are my rules again? And the kids are in charge now. And if I take it away, they're going to, lose it. And so parents will come to me and say, like, we really need to get back on track. And, here's our situation and how can we do that? And, depending on the situation, there's different choices of what you do. If it's gotten really extreme, if you have a kid who is, on the verge of like addictive behavior, the recommendation might be like you have to take devices out of your home for a while. If you just have kids who have just gotten used to pulling out the iPad whenever, and it's just gotten to where like they're lazy to do anything else, and that's bothering you, then you figure out what you want device use to look like in your family, and then you sit down and you have a family meeting and you make it fun, not like the kids are in trouble, and you try to
Mhm.
get their input too. I mean, depending on their age, but I think one of the most important things is to not just be managing this stuff in this sort of top down policing way, but to really kind of make it a family commitment to being healthier with technology. And that means that we have to hear our kids too, and we have to listen to their needs and integrate their opinions and their ideas. And it doesn't mean they get to make the choice, but at least they should have a voice, right? And
Yeah.
so I think that's a really important approach. And then you can make a family plan. How are we going to use technology in our family? And I'll just shout out a resource that I love, which is the smarttalk.org, which
Mhm.
was created by the PTA and I think Norton Security. And it's an excellent, excellent resource for creating a media plan and contract. It's fun, it's engaging, it gets you talking about things as you go through it with your children, and bit by bit you kind of create your family's media plan. And I think it's a really, really great resource for kind of reining it in and getting everyone on the same page.
Yeah. I mean, just anecdotally, I know many families that we know personally don't have a media plan. And it gets around so many issues in addition to what you're talking about. Very simply, kids like to have like to know what's happening, right? And one of the reasons they might keep asking for the iPad is they don't know, okay, we're doing it on this day and maybe this time, what depending on your plan, right? If they know what it is, they're they're least likely to ask about it, right? As much. That's just one example, but it's a little bit of work at the beginning, but it makes your life easier later, basically, if you come up with a plan.
It is a little bit of work, and I think a lot of parents are resistant to a couple things. They're very resistant to angering their children
Yeah.
and having their kids, give them a lot of blowback and, have a tantrum, and they don't want to deal with that.
Yeah.
And they don't want to have to put in a little bit of work and effort. But I will say that, like, I've seen it work pretty successfully, that if you do put in some of that time and some of that work, and if you stick to your rules despite your child's protests, it does kind of just fall into place for most families eventually. And like you're saying, I think that children protest against limits and against boundaries, but they need them. They need them in
Yeah.
all sorts of ways. And we all know that kids who don't have limits have a harder time generally, with emotional regulation, and, just feeling that they should be getting everything they want all the time and not being able to handle, disappointment. So I think there's nothing wrong with setting some healthy and fair limits for your children.
Yeah, it's also true. Well, thank you so much, Julia, for your time. I really appreciate all your insights.
Yeah, it was really fun.